My name is Lena Hart, and at 28, I thought I finally understood what hard work meant. For 4 years, I'd been part of the marketing department at Trident Innovations, a mid-sized tech firm that prided itself on rewarding merit. The irony of that tagline would haunt me later. When I joined, I was just another assistant trying to make rent and prove myself in a company full of people who already had connections. My boss, Mark Lewis, was a charming, smooth-talking department head, the kind of man who could make mediocrity sound like brilliance in every meeting. I used to admire him. I thought he saw potential in me. He didn't. He saw convenience. For years, I became the invisible backbone of his success. I handled every presentation, built every campaign, and fixed every client disaster he didn't know how to manage. He'd stroll into meetings, deliver my work with a smile, and take the credit. And I let him because that's what ambitious people do in the beginning. They swallow pride for the promise of someday. That someday was supposed to arrive last Friday. It had been quietly circulated that the marketing manager position was opening. Everyone knew I was next in line. My projects had the highest engagement rates in company history, and I'd even landed 2 new accounts that saved us from a slow quarter. Mark himself had pulled me aside 3 weeks ago, saying, "Keep doing what you're doing, Lena. Big things are coming." I didn't realize how literal that would be, just not for me. That morning, I wore my best navy blue suit, ironed the night before. My hands trembled as I buttoned the blazer, not from nerves, but from excitement. This was the day I'd finally get recognition. The day all those nights eating instant noodles in front of my laptop would mean something. The office buzzed with energy. Someone had ordered catering, and I caught sight of a champagne bottle being placed in the meeting room. It was unusual. We'd never celebrated promotions like this before. The whole department had been called in at 10 a.m. sharp. I walked in with my coffee, smiling at my colleague Priya, who mouthed, "This is your day," across the table. My heart swelled. I'd imagined this moment 100 times. Mark announcing my promotion, people clapping, the validation washing away every doubt I'd ever carried. Mark walked in, looking smug in his gray suit, his arm around a girl I'd never seen before. She couldn't have been older than 24, sharp eyeliner, glossy curls, a bright red dress that screamed confidence and immaturity all at once. She looked like someone who'd walked into the wrong meeting. "Team," Mark began, clinking his champagne glass, "today's special. We're celebrating the promotion of a bright, promising new leader who's going to take this department to new heights." I smiled. My palms went damp. He turned slightly toward the girl. "Everyone, please welcome our new marketing manager, Ms. Chloe Lewis." The room froze. I felt the ground tilt beneath me. Chloe Lewis, his niece. For a split second, I thought I'd misheard. Maybe it was a temporary role. Maybe it was a training thing, but the words "new manager" echoed like an insult carved into my chest. The applause came slowly, awkwardly. People looked at me with that uncomfortable sympathy you can feel more than see. I clapped too, because what else could I do? Chloe smiled sweetly, completely oblivious to the silent chaos she'd just caused. "I'm so excited to be part of this amazing team," she said, her voice light and rehearsed. "I've always admired what Uncle Mark built here." Uncle Mark. That was it. I forced a smile, so tight my jaw ached. When the meeting ended, Mark patted my shoulder. "Lena, I know you probably expected." I cut him off, still smiling. "No worries, Mark. Congratulations to Chloe." I turned away before my voice cracked. The rest of the day was a blur of polite small talk and invisible humiliation. Chloe spent her first few hours asking me how to access files, where the campaign drafts were, what KPIs meant, things a manager should already know. She sat at my old desk, my name still taped to the monitor. Every time she called me, "Lena, could you help me with this?" a small part of me died. By lunch, I'd locked myself in the restroom, gripping the sink until my knuckles went white. My reflection stared back, tired eyes, smudged lipstick, the kind of face that's trying not to cry in a public bathroom stall. I'd given 4 years of loyalty to a man who replaced me with his family, like I was an outdated computer. When I got home that evening, I didn't even change out of my suit. I sat on the couch, staring at my phone, wondering how humiliation could feel this physical, like a weight pressing on my chest. My mother called, cheerful as ever. "How was your big day, honey?" I couldn't answer. My throat closed up. The next few days were worse. Chloe was now my superior, yet she couldn't complete a report without my help. Mark paraded her around to upper management, pretending the department's success was all her vision. She didn't even understand the campaigns she was credited for. And I stayed quiet, because I needed this job. Rent, bills, the illusion of professionalism, they all chained me to my desk. Until the day of her celebration lunch. Mark invited the CEO, Mr. Dalton, a man I'd only seen in passing. The kind of executive who didn't bother with small departments like ours. But he showed up, smiling politely, sitting through Chloe's self-congratulatory speech about innovation and vision. I stayed in the back, pretending to answer emails. I couldn't bear to listen. Then, after the applause, something strange happened. Mr. Dalton stood, thanked everyone, and said, "Lena Hart, could you step into my office after this?" The room went silent. Chloe froze mid-sentence. Mark blinked. I nodded slowly, unsure whether this was another humiliation or something else entirely. When the celebration ended, I walked toward the CEO's office, every step heavier than the last. My stomach twisted with anxiety. What if he'd heard I'd been resentful? What if I was about to be fired for not being team-spirited enough? But when I entered his office, Mr. Dalton closed the door gently and gestured to a chair. "Sit down, Miss Hart." His voice was calm, observant. "I've been reviewing the numbers from your department," he said. "The reports, the campaigns, the client acquisition data. And I noticed something." My heart pounded. "Sir?" He leaned forward slightly. "Everything with your name on it succeeds. Everything without it doesn't." I froze. He smiled faintly. "Tell me, Miss Hart, how long have you been doing your boss's job for him?" For the first time in weeks, I felt my pulse steady, not from fear, but from the faint, flickering spark of justice. That Monday morning, I sat at my desk pretending to read through quarterly reports, but my eyes kept blurring over the same lines. Every time I looked up, I could see Melissa, my boss's niece, standing near the coffee machine, laughing like she owned the floor. Everyone seemed to orbit around her, eager to please. It was only her third week in the department, and she was already walking around like the place was hers. I kept telling myself I wouldn't let her get under my skin. I was 29 years old, not some intern desperate for approval. I'd spent 6 years working my way up here, pouring every late night and early morning into this company. I had earned my respect, or so I thought. "Emily," came a voice from across the cubicles. It was Tom, my colleague, and the only one who dared to tell me the truth even when it stung. "You okay? You've been staring at that same report for 20 minutes. I blinked, realizing I had been gripping my pen so hard the plastic had bent slightly. I forced a smile. "Yeah, just focused." He leaned on the divider between our desks. "You mean trying not to throw your coffee at Melissa, right?" Despite myself, I laughed. "Something like that." He lowered his voice. "You know the rumors, right? That she's being groomed for the senior project manager role?" I froze. That role was mine. Or at least it was supposed to be. I'd been unofficially promised it 6 months ago by Mr. Jennings, my direct boss, Melissa's uncle. He told me to be patient, that they were just waiting for the new fiscal cycle to begin. And now, suddenly his niece appears out of nowhere, and there's talk? I tried to brush it off, but the words settled like lead in my chest. 2 days later, I stayed late in the office, the glow of the city outside reflecting in the glass panels. Everyone else had gone home except for the cleaning crew. I was finalizing a client presentation that Melissa was supposed to handle but had handed off to me at the last minute. Typical. As I was closing the final slides, I heard voices near the conference room. Mr. Jennings's deep tone carried through the quiet hall. "She'll be a great face for the team. We need someone who can represent us well to the board," he said. Melissa's voice followed, soft and confident. "I just want to make sure the transition is smooth." Emily's been handling most of the groundwork, right? I froze, the cursor blinking over my open laptop. Transition. I stepped quietly toward the glass door, my heart pounding so loud I could hear it. Yes, Jennings replied. She's good, reliable, detail-oriented. But you'll be the one leading. We'll announce it officially Friday. The world tilted. My breath caught in my throat. Friday. They were promoting her. I didn't wait to hear the rest. I packed my bag and left, trying to hold back the tears that burned behind my eyes. By the time I reached my car, I couldn't breathe. I just sat there gripping the steering wheel, shaking. I had given this company everything. I'd covered for Jennings when he missed deadlines. I'd mentored junior staff. I'd sacrificed weekends. And this was how loyalty was rewarded. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind looping the same question over and over. Why wasn't I enough? When morning came, my eyes were swollen, but I pulled my hair back, dressed in my favorite navy blazer, and walked into the office like nothing had happened. If they were going to humiliate me, they wouldn't get the satisfaction of seeing me break. By noon, the announcement went out. Everyone gathered in the open space near the break area. Balloons, cupcakes, and a giant banner that read, "Congratulations, Melissa." I stood near the back, clutching a paper cup of coffee that had long gone cold. Jennings stood in the center, grinning like a proud father. He gave the kind of speech that made my stomach twist. "Melissa brings fresh energy and leadership potential to this department," he said, glancing around. "We're lucky to have her." The room filled with polite applause. Melissa smiled, pretending to blush. Then her eyes flicked toward me, and she actually had the nerve to wink. That was the moment something inside me went cold. Tom caught my eye across the room and mouthed, "I'm sorry." When it was over, I escaped to the restroom, locking the door behind me. I stared at myself in the mirror. Red eyes, tense jaw, shoulders drawn tight. This wasn't me. I'd always been composed, professional, controlled. But now I felt small, like my entire identity had been stripped away in front of everyone I worked with. I thought about walking out, quitting on the spot. But something stopped me. A memory. Mr. Jennings's words from my last performance review. "You're the backbone of this team, Emily. You're going places here." My jaw tightened. Maybe I was the backbone, the one doing all the real work while others got the glory. And maybe that was exactly why they thought I wouldn't fight back. The next few weeks were hell. Melissa strutted around giving half-baked directions, constantly coming to me for help. "Emily, could you just check this report before I send it to Jennings? Emily, can you handle the client call? You know their details better." Every time I wanted to scream, but instead I smiled tightly and did it. Because now I was watching. I noticed things. How Melissa couldn't keep track of project timelines. How she ignored key metrics in the quarterly data. How Jennings covered for her mistakes in meetings, spinning them as fresh perspectives. But I wasn't just sitting quietly anymore. I started saving every email, every file, every chat. I documented missed deliverables and discrepancies. If this company wanted to play politics, I'd play smarter. Then came the big one, the Linwood project. It was our most important client, a multi-million-dollar contract renewal that could determine the entire department's budget. Melissa was in charge of the presentation. 3 days before the meeting, she came to me in a panic. "Emily, my laptop crashed. I lost half the slides," she said, tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. I looked up from my screen slowly. "Did you back them up?" She shook her head. I could have said no. Could have let her fail. But that wasn't who I was. "Send me what you have," I said finally. "I'll help you rebuild it." She exhaled in relief. "Thank you. You're seriously a lifesaver." I smiled faintly. "Yeah, I know." By the time the day of the presentation came, everything looked perfect, on paper. But Melissa hadn't reviewed the financial appendix I'd flagged for her. When she started speaking in front of the board, I saw the mistake coming before she did. She quoted the wrong revenue projection, off by nearly $2 million. The CEO's eyebrows lifted. The room went dead quiet. Jennings shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Melissa, could you clarify that figure? Her face flushed. She stammered, flipping through her notes. It should be in the appendix. I could have let her drown, but I didn't. I stepped forward from my seat, calm and steady. If I may, I said. The correct projection is $12.4 million, not $14.30. The variance is due to the revised vendor contract terms from last quarter. The CEO turned to me. Thank you. Emily, is it? Yes, sir. He nodded slowly. Good catch. Melissa gave a nervous laugh, muttering something about last-minute updates, but the damage was done. After the meeting, the CEO called out, Emily, could you stop by my office later today? Jennings glanced at me sharply, but I only nodded. Inside, though, my pulse was racing. That afternoon, I walked into the CEO's corner office, floor-to-ceiling glass, minimalist furniture, and a skyline view that made everyone else's cubicles look like boxes. He gestured for me to sit. I've been hearing your name a lot lately, he said. I swallowed. Hopefully in a good way, sir. He smiled faintly. Mostly. But I also hear that you're doing a lot of work that others are being credited for. My heart thudded. He leaned forward. Tell me honestly, Emily, what's been going on in Jennings's department? I hesitated, torn between fear and exhaustion. I could lie. I could protect them all and keep my job safe. But something in me, maybe pride, maybe dignity, refused to stay silent. Sir, I said quietly, I think the wrong person got promoted. He didn't react immediately, just watched me, studying my face. Then he nodded once. That's what I thought. For a moment, the room felt completely still. The only sound was the faint hum of the city through the glass walls. The CEO, Richard Callahan, a man known for his calm intensity, didn't speak right away. He just leaned back in his chair, eyes sharp and thoughtful. Emily, he said finally, I want you to tell me exactly what's been happening in Jennings's department. And don't hold back. My hands trembled slightly in my lap. I wasn't used to speaking this freely, especially not to someone like him. But something about his tone made it clear that this was my one chance to be completely honest. So I told him everything. How I'd been handling major client presentations. How Melissa had been assigned leadership roles she couldn't manage. How Jennings routinely dismissed my input while taking credit for results I'd achieved. I didn't embellish, I didn't need to. The facts were damning enough. By the time I finished, Callahan was silent again, fingers steepled under his chin. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and measured. You've been patient, Emily. Too patient. I swallowed, unsure how to respond. He stood and walked to the window, looking out over the skyline. I don't make promotion decisions lightly. When Jennings proposed Melissa for the senior role, I had my doubts. But I gave him the benefit of the doubt because I trusted his judgment. He turned to face me. Now, I'm questioning that trust. My stomach flipped. I'm not asking you to make any accusations, he continued. But I am asking you to keep doing what you're doing, carefully, quietly. I'll be observing things more closely over the next few weeks. I nodded, unsure whether to feel relieved or terrified. Then he added something that stayed with me. Integrity isn't loud, Emily. But when it's consistent, it eventually becomes impossible to ignore. Walking out of his office, I felt like I was breathing air for the first time in weeks. But beneath the relief was a current of fear. If Jennings found out I'd spoken to Callahan, I knew he'd retaliate. And Melissa, she had her uncle's protection. I was walking a fine line. Back at my desk, Tom looked up expectantly. Well, what did he say? I lower my voice. He asked me to keep doing my job, but to watch. Tom raised an eyebrow. Watch. That sounds like corporate for we're about to blow something up. I gave a tight smile. Let's hope so. Still, a small part of me doubted anything would actually change. Big companies like ours didn't crumble over internal politics. People like me got overlooked all the time, swallowed up, forgotten. But then things started happening. The first sign came during a weekly budget review. Melissa had presented a revised cost forecast that was wildly optimistic. I noticed immediately that her projections ignored key overhead costs from the new vendor contract. Callahan joined the meeting unexpectedly, sitting quietly at the end of the long table. He said nothing as Melissa stumbled through her presentation, smiling too brightly, her confidence starting to crack. Then, halfway through, he looked directly at me. "Emily," he said evenly, "you've been handling the Linwood budget, haven't you? What's your take on these numbers?" Every head turned toward me. Jennings shot me a warning glance that practically screamed, "Don't you dare." But I wasn't the same timid employee I'd been a month ago. I opened the spreadsheet on my laptop. "With respect, sir, I believe these projections are inaccurate. We're likely to exceed costs by nearly 8% unless adjustments are made." Callahan's brows lifted slightly. 8%.
Yes.
Melissa's forecast doesn't include the updated maintenance fees from the new vendor. Those were approved 2 weeks ago. The silence that followed was deafening. Jennings cleared his throat. Yes, I think there's been a misunderstanding." But Callahan cut him off. "No, I think there's been negligence." Melissa's face went pale. After that meeting, the atmosphere in the department shifted. Jennings was suddenly less cheerful, more watchful. Melissa, once full of fake confidence, started shrinking from attention. Meanwhile, I kept my head down and worked. I didn't gloat. I didn't seek revenge, not yet. I just let the truth unfold naturally, piece by piece. And Callahan noticed. He started CCing me on department-wide communications. He called me into strategy meetings without Jennings. Sometimes, he'd ask for my opinion on company-wide matters that were far beyond my pay grade. It was subtle, but unmistakable. One Friday evening, as I was gathering my things, Callahan's assistant appeared at my desk. "Mr. Callahan would like to see you before you go," she said. When I stepped into his office, he was reviewing a file. Without looking up, he asked, "How long have you been with us, Emily?" "Almost 6 years." He nodded. "And in all that time, you've never filed a single complaint?" I hesitated.
"No, sir."
I just kept my head down. He looked up then, meeting my gaze. "That's exactly why you're still here. Because you focused on the work, not the politics." Then he closed the file and said something that made my pulse quicken. "Next week, I'm calling for an internal audit of Jennings's department. I'd like you to prepare a full summary of your current projects, every report, every deliverable, every communication trail. Be thorough." My throat went dry.
"An audit." "Yes."
"And Emily," his voice softened slightly, "I want you to know this isn't about revenge. It's about restoring balance. People like Jennings think they can manipulate the system because they assume no one will notice. But I've been noticing." That weekend, I barely slept. I spent hours combing through old emails and archived files, carefully compiling timelines of who had done what and when. What I found made my stomach churn. There were entire project milestones signed off by Jennings using my reports, with his name attached. Client deliverables that Melissa had presented as her own work. Revisions and strategies that I had written from scratch, stripped of any mention of me. And the deeper I went, the uglier it got. There were expense claims for client dinners that never happened, duplicate reimbursements, even forged signatures. By Sunday night, I sat staring at my laptop, my heart pounding. I wasn't just looking at unfairness anymore. I was looking at fraud. For a moment, I hesitated. Was I really about to expose all this? What if it backfired? What if they painted me as the problem, a jealous employee lashing out because she didn't get promoted? Then I remembered standing in that room with the cupcakes and banner, watching Melissa beam under the glow of my promotion.
"No, not this time."
Monday morning, I delivered everything to Callahan's office in a sealed folder. He flipped through the first few pages, then gave me a slow, approving nod. "This," he said quietly, "is exactly what I needed." Over the next few days, the investigation rolled out quietly, HR meetings, compliance checks, routine data verification. Word spread fast, and tension crackled through the office like static. Jennings stopped greeting people in the hallway. Melissa called in sick twice. Tom and I exchanged uneasy glances, knowing the storm was about to break. Then one morning, the email came. "Department meeting. mandatory attendance. 10 a.m., conference room A. When we walked in, Callahan was already there, flanked by 2 HR officers. Jennings and Melissa sat at the front, pale and silent. Callahan's tone was calm but cold. After a thorough internal review, we've uncovered serious breaches of integrity and misrepresentation within this department. Effective immediately, Mr. Jennings and Ms. Peterson are suspended pending further action. You could have heard a pin drop. Jennings tried to protest. His voice cracked as he stammered about miscommunication and clerical errors. But Callahan didn't waver. "I trusted you," he said simply. "You abused that trust. And you used good employees, including Emily, to cover your incompetence." Melissa's eyes filled with tears, but for once, I didn't feel sorry for her. Because in that moment, I realized something important. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice, about being seen, finally, for who I really was. When the meeting ended, people avoided looking at me. Not out of pity, out of shock. Tom approached quietly. "You did it," he said under his breath. I exhaled shakily. "No," I said. "The truth did." Still, when I returned to my desk, I found an email from Callahan waiting for me. Just one line. "See me at 4 o'clock. For the next few hours, my heart refused to settle. I didn't know what he would say, or what came next. But when 4 o'clock finally came, and I stepped into his office again, Callahan was smiling. "Emily," he said, standing to shake my hand, "how would you like to lead the department you helped build?" For the first time in months, I felt something lift inside me, something fierce and freeing. "I'd like that very much, sir," I said softly. The first day after Jennings and Melissa were escorted out, the office didn't feel like mine. Even though I'd been there for 6 years, even though I'd poured my heart into every project, suddenly the walls, the desks, the people, they all looked at me differently. Some with respect, some with envy, some with quiet suspicion. When I walked into the department that morning, conversation died instantly. I could feel every eye turned toward me, and I hated it. Tom, ever the brave one, broke the silence first. "Good morning, boss." That earned a few nervous chuckles. I smiled faintly. "Don't start," I warned, but there was warmth in my voice. Still, I couldn't ignore the tension. Jennings' supporters, mostly the ones who'd benefited from his favoritism, kept their heads down. Others whispered when they thought I couldn't hear. And me? I just focused on breathing. At noon, Callahan called me into his office. He was standing by the window again, sunlight cutting across his desk. "You did well," he said. "But I know this won't be easy. People will resent you, not because you don't deserve it, but because you proved them wrong." I nodded. "I can handle that." "I know you can. That's why I chose you." He handed me a new folder. "These are your first leadership directives. Effective immediately, you're officially senior project manager. HR will make the announcement this afternoon." I stared at the folder, the weight of it sinking in. "Thank you," I said softly. Callahan smiled slightly. "Don't thank me yet. You're walking into a storm. But if anyone can bring order to it, it's you." By the time the official email hit the company inbox, the air in the department felt like static. I sat at my desk, pretending to focus on work, but inside, I was a mix of pride and dread. Tom appeared at my side, holding 2 cups of coffee. "Congratulations," he said, grinning. "Now you really are the boss." I accepted the cup with a weak smile. "Feels surreal." "It should. You earned this." I looked at him, then really looked. Tom had been there through it all. He'd seen the humiliation, the exhaustion, the betrayal. And yet, he never once treated me like a victim. "Thanks," I said quietly, "for having my back." "Always," he replied. But not everyone shared Tom's sentiment. By Wednesday, the murmurs started. She only got it because she exposed them. She's Callahan's new favorite. Let's see how long she lasts. I'd overhear fragments while walking past the break room or copier. It stung more than I wanted to admit. Because the truth was, I didn't want this position because of what I'd uncovered. I wanted it because I'd earned it, through years of late nights, flawless projects, and unseen effort. Still, the rumors persisted. So I did what I'd always done best. I worked harder. I rebuilt the project tracking systems Jennings had neglected. I called in client feedback. I started mentoring junior analysts, giving them the same chances I'd never had. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. A week later, I was in the middle of a late-night review when I heard a knock at my door.
It was Callahan again.
"Still here?" he asked. I smiled wearily. "Someone's got to fix what they broke." He chuckled softly and stepped inside. "I wanted to see how you're settling in." "Trying to find my footing," I admitted. He leaned against the doorway. "You know, when I first started here, I had a boss a lot like Jennings. Took credit for my work, made me question my worth. It took me years to realize the only way to win was to stop needing his approval." I looked up, surprised by his honesty. "How did you do it?" "I didn't fight him directly," he said. "I just became undeniable." Those words lodged themselves in my mind like a spark. By Friday, I decided to hold my first official team meeting. When I walked into the conference room, I could feel the skepticism radiating off some of them. Half the team still hadn't accepted me as their leader. The other half seemed uncertain, waiting to see which way the wind would blow. I stood at the head of the table and took a deep breath. "I know the past few weeks have been messy," I began. "And I know some of you probably don't trust me yet. That's okay. You don't have to, not right away." A few eyebrows lifted. "But what I need," I continued, "is your focus. We have 2 major client accounts on the line, and I won't let this department fail because of our past. We can be better. We will be better." There was a pause. Then, slowly, one of the analysts, Maria, quiet but sharp, nodded. "What's the plan?" That simple question broke the silence. I smiled. "Let's rebuild from the ground up." And just like that, the meeting shifted. People started talking, brainstorming, engaging. For the first time since the chaos, there was energy in the room, real, hopeful energy. In the following weeks, something remarkable happened. Clients began noticing the difference. Our reports were more accurate, our delivery times faster. The department that had once been chaotic under Jennings's leadership was now disciplined and transparent. Even Callahan stopped by one morning just to say, "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." It was subtle, but I could see the tide turning. The whispers faded. The same people who doubted me were now asking for my input. It felt like breathing after being underwater for too long. Then, one afternoon, as I was reviewing quarterly data, I received an unexpected email. From Melissa Peterson, subject, "I owe you an apology." I froze. Against my better judgment, I opened it. "Emily, I know you have no reason to read this, but I need to say it. I wasn't qualified for that promotion, and deep down I knew it. I was just desperate to prove myself to my uncle. I let him push me into a role I couldn't handle, and I resented you because I saw how good you were. You didn't deserve what happened."
I'm sorry.
"Melissa." I stared at the screen for a long time, feeling a strange mix of emotions, anger, sadness, and, unexpectedly, closure. I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. That night, I stayed late again, but this time it wasn't out of fear. I was finalizing a major presentation for Callahan, a proposal that would expand our division into strategic consulting. As I clicked through the slides, I caught my reflection in the dark window. Gone was the timid, exhausted woman who'd stood by while others took credit for her work. The woman staring back at me looked steady, confident, in control. I realized then that revenge wasn't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it looked like success built on integrity, like proving, quietly and undeniably, that you were never the problem. The next morning, Callahan called me into his office again. "I've reviewed your proposal," he said. "It's brilliant." "Thank you," I replied, trying to hide the smile tugging at my lips. "You know," he added, "we're restructuring senior management next quarter. I'd like you to consider a director role." My heart stopped. "Director?"
Yes.
"You've demonstrated not just competence but leadership, and that's rarer than you think." I could barely breathe. "Think about it," he said, smiling. "I'll expect your answer next week." As I walked back to my office, I felt tears prick my eyes. Not out of sadness, but gratitude. Because after everything, after being overlooked, dismissed, betrayed, I'd finally been seen. And I hadn't needed to destroy anyone to get here. All I'd done was tell the truth, stay consistent, and refuse to let anyone define my worth. For the first time in my career, I wasn't surviving. I was leading. And I knew, deep in my bones, that this was only the beginning. The celebration photos hit the company intranet the next morning. I wasn't even in the frame. I watched people congratulate Emily under the post. Well deserved. You earned it. Future of the company. While a knot formed in my stomach that felt like it would never loosen. I'd barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that look of pity from my coworkers, the one they'd tried to hide behind polite smiles. I saw the smug little grin Emily had given me when she whispered, "Guess you should have smiled more in meetings." I arrived early that morning, long before anyone else, and sat at my desk staring at my computer screen. My reflection looked back, pale, hollow-eyed, tired. I'd given years of my life to this place. I'd stayed late, worked weekends, skipped vacations. I'd trained new hires, saved failing accounts, and even covered for my boss when he messed up numbers on a presentation. And this was my reward. A few hours later, the office came alive with chatter, laughter, and the sound of keyboards clicking. Emily strutted in, holding a coffee cup with Boss Lady, printed in gold. She walked past me without a word, but her perfume lingered, sharp and artificial, just like her. Then, as if to twist the knife deeper, Mr. Thomas sent out an email. "Everyone, please report to conference room A at 10 a.m. for a quick departmental update." When we gathered in the room, he stood by the whiteboard with Emily beside him. Her lipstick matched the crimson of her new blazer. "I wanted to take a moment," he began, "to thank everyone for their hard work, especially during the last quarter. And of course, to congratulate Emily once again on her new position." People clapped. I did too, mechanically, because not clapping would draw attention. Then he said it, the line that made my stomach twist. "Emily will be overseeing the new regional accounts division," he said proudly. "She'll be taking over a few of the clients previously managed by Sarah." I froze. My name, hanging in the air like a slap. Emily turned to me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Don't worry, Sarah," she said sweetly. "I'll take good care of your clients." There was polite laughter. I managed a tight smile, but inside I was shaking. That meeting broke something inside me, not because I lost a promotion, but because I realized how easily they'd erased me. After everyone filed out, I stayed behind, staring at the whiteboard. My projects, my strategies, my ideas, all now under her control. That's when I noticed something odd. On the corner of the board was a list of upcoming proposals for executive review. One of them, Expansion Initiative, East Coast Pilot, was mine. Except it was now labeled, Lead, Emily Carter. She hadn't even started her role, and she was already taking credit. That night, I sat in my apartment with the city lights flickering through my window. My laptop was open, and I stared at the spreadsheets and project files I'd created over the years. Every number, every slide, every note, I knew them by heart. I hovered my finger over the delete key. For a second, I wanted to wipe everything. Let them see how much they relied on me. But I didn't. That would make me look bitter.
Petty. Weak.
Instead, I did something else. I opened my private drive, the one no one knew about. I'd kept backups of every project I ever worked on, every financial breakdown, every correction I'd made for Thomas's sloppy numbers. I'd also saved email threads, including the one where he'd admitted misreporting revenue last year and asked me to fix it quietly. At the time, I hadn't thought much of it. But now I looked at that message differently. The anger that had been eating me alive suddenly began to crystallize into something sharper. Focused. Controlled. The next day, I decided to act normal. I greeted Emily with a polite smile. I congratulated her again when people were around. And when Thomas called me into his office to make sure I wasn't upset, I smiled and said, "Of course not. I understand completely." He looked relieved. "That's the spirit, Sarah. Keep up the good work." Then he handed me a new assignment, reviewing a report Emily had prepared for the CEO's monthly meeting. "Just check it over before I send it," he said. When I opened the file later, my jaw tightened. Half of the data was copied directly from a presentation I'd written months ago. She hadn't even changed the formatting. And worse, her figures were wrong. She'd inflated projected profits by nearly 20%. Whether that was incompetence or intentional, I didn't know. But I did know that if this report reached the CEO, she'd be questioned, maybe even exposed. And then, I remembered something else. The CEO was returning from an overseas trip next week. He'd scheduled one-on-one meetings with senior staff, including Thomas and Emily. An idea began to form. Over the next few days, I played my role perfectly. I smiled when Emily bragged about her new strategy. I nodded when Thomas praised her leadership. I even helped her polish the presentation, just enough to make her trust me. But in the background, I made small, deliberate changes. I updated figures to reflect real numbers, added notes in the margins citing sources. All accurate, all verifiable. But I left her inflated versions saved separately under Draft 1, Emily Carter. Then, I sent the corrected version to Thomas with a simple note. "Please review final file before CEO meeting." And I copied the CEO's assistant. That Friday morning, I arrived early again. The office buzzed with nervous energy. The CEO, Mr. Reynolds, was back in town. Everyone wanted to look their best. Emily wore a white power suit, perfectly tailored. She was radiant, confident, untouchable. I sat at my desk quietly, pretending to work while the meeting began behind closed doors. Through the frosted glass, I could see faint silhouettes moving. An hour passed, then another. Finally, the door opened. Emily came out first. Her face was pale, her lips pressed into a thin line. She walked straight past me, didn't say a word. Thomas followed, red-faced and sweating. And then, Mr. Reynolds appeared. He was tall, calm, deliberate in every step. His gaze swept across the room before landing on me. "Sarah," he said evenly, "could you join me for a moment?" My heart pounded. I stood, smoothed my skirt, and followed him inside. He closed the door. The air in the room felt heavy. He gestured toward the chair. "Sit." I obeyed. For a long moment he said nothing. He just looked at me with those sharp, assessing eyes. Finally he spoke. "I reviewed the proposal you helped prepare," he said. "Tell me, did you notice the discrepancies in the financial projections?" I hesitated. "Yes, sir. I did." "And did you correct them?" "Yes." He nodded slowly. "Good. Because the original numbers could have caused serious problems." He leaned back, fingers steepled. "I also understand that most of the research in that proposal, and in several others, originated from your work." I swallowed. "That's correct." He let out a slow breath. "Sarah, I value loyalty, but I value integrity more. Thank you for not letting false information reach my desk." I didn't move, didn't speak. Then his tone softened. "I've been watching this department for a while. The favoritism, the shortcuts. It ends now." He stood. "Effective immediately, Emily Carter's promotion is revoked, and Mr. Thomas will be placed under review pending an internal audit." My pulse quickened. I didn't dare look up. "And you," he continued, "will temporarily oversee regional operations until we appoint a new director." I blinked. "Sir, He raised a hand. "It's not official yet. But if your performance remains consistent, I see no reason why it shouldn't become permanent." I left his office feeling lightheaded. My legs trembled as I walked back to my desk. Emily's eyes followed me, cold and venomous. I didn't return her glare. I didn't need to. That night, I sat in my apartment again, but this time it felt different. I wasn't staring at spreadsheets or old emails. I was staring at the city, bright, alive, full of possibility. For months, I'd thought revenge would mean making them suffer. But maybe it wasn't about that. Maybe real revenge was being seen, being recognized for what I'd already done. Still, I couldn't help but smile when I checked my inbox one last time before bed. There it was from CEO Office Subject. Confidential. Meeting next week regarding leadership transition. And right beneath it, another message, this one from Thomas. Sarah, can we talk tomorrow? Please. I shut the laptop gently, leaned back in my chair, and whispered to the quiet room. Now you want to talk. I barely slept that night, but not from anxiety this time. It was adrenaline. For the first time in months, I felt something other than bitterness or exhaustion. I felt alive. I kept replaying that moment in the CEO's office over and over again. The way his voice had been steady, fair, decisive. The way he'd said, "Favoritism ends now." When I walked into the office the next morning, the air was different. Whisper heavy. People glanced up from their desks, eyes darting between me, Thomas's closed door, and Emily's empty cubicle. By mid-morning, the rumors had spread like wildfire. Thomas had been suspended pending investigation. Emily hadn't shown up at all. And HR had sent an email announcing an interim departmental restructuring. My name was in that email, Interim Regional Operations Lead, Sarah Mitchell. I stared at the screen, heart hammering. My hands trembled slightly as I scrolled down, rereading it, making sure it was real.
It was.
I expected to feel vindicated, maybe even triumphant. But what I felt was quiet, like a long, heavy silence after a storm. I spent most of the day sorting through the chaos Thomas had left behind. His office was a mess of unfinished reports and signed approvals and badly kept client files. I stayed late again, but this time, not because I had to prove myself, because I wanted to make things right. As the sun sank behind the skyscrapers, painting the windows in shades of orange and gold, I heard footsteps behind me. Emily. She stood in the doorway, her face pale and drawn. Gone was the confident smile, the sharp suit. She looked smaller somehow, deflated. "Congratulations," she said, her voice flat. I didn't look up. "Thanks." She lingered for a moment, then stepped further in. "You know this isn't fair, right? You made me look like a fool in front of everyone." I looked at her, then really looked. She wasn't angry. She was scared. "I didn't make you look like anything," I said quietly. "You did that yourself." Her jaw tightened. "You think you're better than me?" "No," I said. "Just more honest." She laughed, sharp, humorless. "Do you have any idea how hard I've worked to get here? My uncle believed in me." "Your uncle covered for you," I said, my voice calm but steady. "And you took credit for things you didn't understand." Her eyes glistened. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I almost believed her. But then I remembered the smirk on her face when she'd taken my clients, the way she'd humiliated me in that meeting. "Maybe next time," I said, standing, "you'll learn the difference between opportunity and entitlement." She stared at me for a long moment, then turned and left without another word. When the door clicked shut behind her, I sat down again, hands trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of it all finally hitting me. The following days were a blur. Meetings, audits, apologies, HR investigations. Turns out, Thomas had been funneling resources into side projects to boost Emily's performance numbers, reallocating staff hours, manipulating client reports, even directing bonuses to her department. The evidence was undeniable. By Friday, he was gone. The CEO, Mr. Reynolds, called me into his office again that afternoon. He smiled faintly as I entered. "Busy week for you, Sarah." "That's one way to put it," I said with a small laugh. He gestured for me to sit. "You've handled this transition with remarkable composure. The board's been impressed." "Thank you, sir." He nodded, then leaned forward. "I'll be blunt. We want you to stay on permanently. Director of Regional Operations." My breath caught. I'd imagined this moment 1,000 times, back when I still believed hard work was enough. And now, here it was. But it didn't feel the way I thought it would. I hesitated. "Sir, I appreciate that. But I need to be honest, after everything that's happened, I'm not sure I want to stay." He studied me for a moment. "Because of the betrayal?" I nodded. "Because of the culture that allowed it." He leaned back, thoughtful. "That's fair. But culture doesn't change by itself. It changes when people like you stay and lead." His words hung in the air for a moment. Then, softly, I said, "You really think I can fix this?" "I don't think," he said. "I know." I left his office with the offer letter in hand, but no decision made. That weekend, I drove out to the lake. The one I used to visit before life became endless deadlines and office politics. I sat on the pier, the wind tugging at my hair, the water reflecting the late afternoon sun. I thought about who I'd been when I started this job, ambitious, hopeful, a little naive. I thought about the nights I stayed late just to make sure everything was perfect, believing someone would notice. I thought about the betrayal, the humiliation, the anger. And then, I thought about the woman I'd become, stronger, sharper, quieter in my confidence. When I went back to the office Monday morning, I placed the signed letter on Mr. Reynolds's desk. "I'll take the position," I said simply. He smiled.
Good.
"I expected you would." Over the next few months, things began to change. Slowly but noticeably. I promoted people based on merit, the ones who worked hard but never spoke up because they thought no one cared. I implemented transparency in our reports and client dealings. I made sure no one could hide behind titles or connections. And when new hires asked me how I'd gotten to where I was, I told them the truth. I earned it, I'd say. The hard way. Emily's name came up now and then. She'd taken a job at a smaller firm, I heard. I didn't gloat, didn't feel satisfaction. Just a quiet acceptance that the world had a way of balancing itself. One evening, as I was leaving the office, Mr. Reynolds caught me by the elevator. "You've done good work," he said. "The team's stronger now. You've made people believe in fairness again." "Thank you," I said. "That means a lot." He smiled. "You know, Sarah, you remind me of someone I once knew. She built her career on integrity, too. It wasn't easy for her either." I tilted my head. "What happened to her?" "She became CEO," he said, and stepped into the elevator with a knowing smile. As the doors closed, I stood there, thinking about his words. About how far I'd come. Later that night, I sat on my balcony with a glass of wine, the city lights flickering below. For the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about the next project or the next problem. I was just at peace. The betrayal had hurt. Deeply. But maybe it had been necessary. Maybe without it, I wouldn't have learned that my worth wasn't tied to anyone's approval, not a boss's, not a title's, not even a company's. The truth was simple. I hadn't just survived what they did to me. I'd rebuilt something better in its place. And that, I realized, was the most satisfying revenge of all. Still, I couldn't shake one lingering thought. The look on Emily's face that day in the office. The fear.
The shame.
I hoped, quietly, that one day she'd learn from it. That she'd understand what real success looked like, not power, not favoritism, but respect. As the wind rustled through the trees and the city buzzed far below, I whispered to myself, half a smile on my lips. They thought they could bury me. But I wasn't a seed. I was the storm. A year can change everything. 12 months after that night, the night I accepted the role I once thought I'd lost forever, I stood in the same office, only now it felt entirely different. The fluorescent lights seemed softer. The walls didn't close in anymore. The energy in the air had shifted. Less fear, more focus. People smiled when I walked past, not out of obligation, but because they wanted to. Sometimes I still caught myself waiting for the tension to return, for the old power games to creep back in. But they didn't. Because I'd built something different here. Something real. My nameplate now read Sarah Mitchell, Director of Regional Operations. I still wasn't used to seeing it. There were days I'd catch myself touching the edge of the plaque like it was proof I hadn't imagined it all. I'd been through so much. Betrayal, humiliation, exhaustion. But this wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of the one I was meant to live. It was a Friday morning in late spring when Mr. Reynolds called me into the conference room. His tone on the phone had been warm but formal, a combination I'd come to recognize as important news. When I entered, he was sitting at the head of the table with a few board members. There were coffee cups, a stack of reports, and an unmistakable air of ceremony. "Sarah," he said with a smile, gesturing for me to sit. It's been a full year since we put you in charge of operations. The numbers speak for themselves. Client satisfaction up by 24%, turnover down, productivity through the roof. I smiled modestly. I can't take all the credit. The team. The team reflects its leader. One of the board members interrupted. You've built something solid here. Mr. Reynolds leaned forward. Which brings me to the point. The board voted unanimously this morning. We're promoting you to Vice President of Regional Strategy. For a moment, the room blurred.
VP.
It was the position Thomas had once said I'd never be ready for. I managed a steady smile, though my throat tightened. I don't know what to say. Say yes, Mr. Reynolds chuckled. I nodded slowly. Then yes, absolutely. As the meeting ended, I shook hands with each of them, my heart still racing. When the door finally closed behind me, I stood in the hallway, taking a deep breath. The last time I'd walked out of a meeting like this, I'd been humiliated. I'd watched my boss hand everything I'd worked for to his niece while the office applauded. And now, here I was, standing taller, holding my own, my success undeniable. I wanted to cry, but instead I smiled, because this time, I'd earned it. Later that afternoon, I was on my way out of the building when I heard a familiar voice call my name. Sarah? I turned. Emily. She looked different, older somehow. Not in age, but in spirit. Her usual glossy polish was gone. Her hair was tied back, her makeup faint. She wore a simple blazer and carried a folder pressed tightly against her chest. I didn't know you worked nearby, I said carefully. She nodded, a hesitant smile on her lips. I started at Bravestone Consulting a few months ago. Smaller firm, but honest work. I caught the faint note of humility in her voice. The same woman who once flaunted privilege like armor now spoke with a trace of vulnerability. I'm glad to hear that, I said sincerely. She shifted the folder in her hands. I heard you've done really well. VP now, right? I nodded. Just today. Her eyes flickered, part admiration, part sadness. You deserve it, Sarah. You always did. It was strange hearing that from her. Thank you, I said softly. And I mean this, I hope you're doing better now. She gave a small, genuine smile. I am. It took me a while to see things clearly. I used to think connections were everything. Turns out, integrity lasts longer. We stood there for a moment, two women shaped by the same storm, now finally at peace with it. Before she turned to go, she said, For what it's worth, I'm sorry. For all of it. I nodded. Apology accepted. And I meant it. As she walked away, the late afternoon light fell across the lobby. Soft, golden, forgiving. For the first time, I realized forgiveness wasn't about letting someone else off the hook. It was about freeing yourself from the chains of resentment. The following weeks were a blur of new responsibilities, travel, and meetings. My name started appearing in emails from executives in New York, London, Tokyo. I was sitting at tables I'd once only dreamed of. But every time I felt overwhelmed, I'd think back to that girl, the one sitting alone in her apartment after losing the promotion, replaying every moment of her humiliation. The one who almost quit. She didn't quit. She fought through every whispered rumor, every stolen opportunity. Every night, she went home too tired to cry. She became me. One evening, I stayed late after a long meeting. The office was quiet, just the low hum of the city beyond the windows. I stood by the glass wall, looking out over the skyline, the same view I used to stare at when I was an assistant, wondering if I'd ever make it to the other side of those glass ceilings. Now I was above them, not because I played their game better, but because I refused to play it at all. I picked up my phone and opened my email. There was one new message, subject line, Leadership Seminar, Keynote Request. They wanted me to speak to a group of young professionals about resilience and integrity in corporate leadership. I smiled to myself and typed back, I'd be honored. A month later, I stood on a stage in front of a crowd of 200 people, recent graduates, young employees, and managers just beginning their careers. I looked out at them and saw myself in their faces, the ambition, the hunger, the fear of being overlooked. When I spoke, my voice was calm but full of conviction. I once worked for a man who told me promotions weren't about hard work, they were about connections. He gave my promotion to his niece. I thought that was the end of my story, but it wasn't. It was the beginning. I learned that when people underestimate you, it's not a reflection of your worth, it's a reflection of their vision. I learned that integrity may take longer to win, but it never fades. And I learned that revenge doesn't always mean destroying someone else. Sometimes, it just means succeeding in front of them, gracefully. There was silence, then a slow swell of applause. As I stepped off the stage, a young woman approached me, eyes bright.
"Thank you," she said.
I needed to hear that. I was passed over for a promotion last week. I thought about quitting. I smiled gently. "Don't quit. Rewrite the story." She nodded, tears glistening, and I realized something profound. Maybe my pain had a purpose after all. Maybe this was it. That night, I sat on my balcony again, watching the lights of the city flicker like constellations. I thought about every person who doubted me, every door that had been slammed in my face, every time I'd swallowed my anger to keep my dignity intact. And for the first time, I felt gratitude, not for the betrayal itself, but for the strength it forced me to find. I raised my glass slightly, as if toasting the skyline. To the ones who tried to break me, I whispered, "You built me instead." The wind picked up, carrying the words into the night. And somewhere, deep inside, I knew this wasn't just my victory. It was my transformation. Because revenge had never really been about proving them wrong. It was about proving me right.
And I did.